Hello, this is plot summary of Jane Eyre, a Victorian novel by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre as a novel consists of five parts. Part one is set in Gateshead, where the child protagonist, Jane Eyre, the orphan child, lived with her uncle's wife, Mrs. Reed, after the death of her parents. She lived with her cousins, the Reed children, Eliza, Georgiana, and John. While Eliza and Georgiana are calm children, John is a bully boy who used to annoy Jane and beat her. When Jane fights back after John throws a book at her head, Mrs. Reed, his mother, blames her for starting the fight and lying about it. Actually, Mrs. Reed always takes the side of her children and particularly her son, and always accuses Jane that she is a rebellious liar child. That is why Mrs. Reed decides to punish Jane by imprisoning her in the Red Room, or the room in which Jane's uncle died 8 years ago. The explanation of the name of the room is that it has red carpets and many red furniture. As a child, Jane is very terrified by this experience, as she imagined that the ghost of her dead uncle appear to her. After months, Mrs. Reed decides to get rid of Jane by sending her into a charity school specified for the daughters of clergymen. That's why she contacted Mr. Brocklehurst, the manager of or the headmaster of the school, and tells him to watch Jane carefully because the girl is a liar. This is the beginning of the second stage of Jane's life. She moved from Gateshead, or the place where she lived with her aunt and cousins, into Lowood, the charity boarding school. By boarding school, we mean a school outside home in which the child or the pupil stays for a long time. Lowood School is a dismal place or a gloomy place. There is never enough to eat, and the girls are forbidden even or prohibited even the smallest pleasures in the name of teaching them Christian humility. Jane makes friends with a sweet-natured, pious, or religious girl named Helen Burns, who tells her that they ought to bear their sufferings at the school with patience. Helen never shows resentment or anger. even when she becomes the favorite target of the school's neatest teacher, Miss Scratched, which means that Jane was not happy at this school because the headmaster, or Mr. Brocklehurst, treats her badly, and Miss Scratchard treats her badly too. But when Mr. Brocklehurst humiliates Jane by, or insults Jane by repeating Mrs. Reed's charge or accusation against her in front of the whole school that she is a liar girl and a bad girl, Jane starts to rebel or to object against this bad treatment. Jane talks the school superintendent or the supervisor into getting a letter from the Reed family apothecary, or the one who treats her after her bad experience of imprisonment in the Red Room. The letter of this person clears Jane in front of other teachers and students in the school that she already suffers from the bad treatment of her aunt. When spring comes, the school is swept by typhus epidemic or infectious disease, so that about half the girls fall ill and some even die. Helen, too, the best friend of Jane, is ill, but from consumption or tuberculosis. And she died after Jane sneaks into Helen's room for a visit. She is shocked to find her friend has only few hours to live. Helen dies in Jane's arms, proclaiming her or announcing or stating her steadfast or her strong faith in God. As a result of the epidemic or the spread of this infectious disease, Lowood School comes under investigation and the conditions at the school are improved. Jane stays on as a pupil or as a student and later as a teacher, which means that after reaching the age of 18, Jane works at the same school as a teacher until she is 19 years old. Jane has become a dear friend of Miss Temple, the school superintendent or the school supervisor or headmaster. And when she leaves her job to get married, Jane starts to feel loneliness. Jane decides that the time has come for her to leave as well. Now, her friend Helen has died some years ago, and her best teacher, Miss Temple, has been married. So Jane suffers again from her loneliness. So she cannot bear staying in this school anymore. Jane advertises in a newspaper in order to work as a governess, and she has one response from Mrs. Fairfax. Mrs. Fairfax lives in a substantial or large or big country house in Thornfield Hall, and this is the start of the third stage in Jane's life. Only after she has moved in does Jane realize that Mrs. Fairfax is not the mother of the daughter whom Jane is going to teach, but Mrs. Fairfax is only the housekeeper. Jane becomes quite fond of her only pupil, Adele Varens, a French little girl whose mother has died. Yet there is an aura or an atmosphere of mystery about the house and its master, Mr. Edward Rochester, who is seldom at home, who comes home at rare occasions. And from time to time, Jane hears eerie or strange laughter coming from one of the locked rooms on the third story of the house or the third floor of the house. Mrs. Fairfax tells her that this is Grace Poole, the stern servant or a servant who speaks very little, who spends much of her time sewing by her needle in that part of the house. One day, Adil was in a holiday from her lessons, and Mrs. Fairfax wanted to send a letter so that Jane takes the letter and decides to go into the post office in the neighboring village. On her way, she met Mr. Rochester, who comes unexpectedly to Thornfield. He is a dark, brooding man in his late 30s. He has imperious or arrogant manner. Jane first meets him on the road after he has been thrown from his horse and offers him help without realizing his true character. In Thornfield, Mr. Rochester asks Jane whether he is handsome, and Jane frankly answers, "No, sir." Instead of being offended or annoyed by Jane's answer, Rochester is intrigued and charmed or affected by her boldness or frankness and starts to fall in her love. So that there is already a rapport or a relationship developing between the two of them. One night, Jane awakens to the sound of the eerie laughter or the strange laughter just outside her bedroom door, and she smells smoke to discover that someone has set fire to the hangings or the curtains around Mr. Rochester's bed. She douses the flames with a pitcher of water. The way Rochester holds Jane's hand after he awakens suggests feelings that go beyond mere gratitude or thanking her for saving his life. But she slips away and returns to her room. The next day, Rochester is gone. He stays away 2 weeks, and when he does return, he brings with him a party of house guests for an extended stay or a long stay in this manor house. Among the guests is Miss Ingram and her two daughters, Mrs. Ingram and her two daughters, Blanche and Mary. It's obvious that Blanche is doing her best to snare or to tempt or to attract the attention of Mr. Rochester, but Jane can only suffer her jealousy in silence because Jane realizes quite well that she is beneath Mr. Rochester in the class hierarchy. One day during the house party, two strange things happened. Firstly, Mr. Rochester disguises himself as a gypsy woman, a fortune teller woman, a woman who foretells the luck for people and pretends to tell her fortune. He tries to find out whether Jane cares for him. Jane is wary or cautious, however, and doesn't reveal or um, tells frankly her true feelings. Jane is awakened in the middle of the night by calls for help from someone in the third floor or the third story of the house. The calls are from Mr. Richard Mason, who is unexpected visitor who had arrived from Jamaica or the Caribbean islands earlier that day. Mr. Rochester asks Jane to stay with Mr. Mason while he rides to town for the doctor. Jane observes in horror that Mason is bleeding heavily from a stab, and by the stab is a cut caused by knife bite, which means biting by the mouth of someone. Judging by his frantic or fearful cry, she sucked my blood. She has been attacked by Grace Bull. Till now, Jane does not understand the true character of the person in the third floor who causes this terror, and she expects that Grace Poole is the one who causes these strange incidents. Before the house party ends, Jane is called back to get Shield to the bedside of the dying Mrs. Reed, her uncle's widow. Mrs. Reed, on her deathbed, confesses to Jane or tells Jane that 3 years ago, the brother of Jane's dead mother had written from Madeira saying that he wanted to adopt Jane or takes Jane as his daughter and make her his heir. Out of spite or out of hatred, Mrs. Reed wrote back to the uncle, John Eyre, telling him that Jane died of typhus at the Lowood School. This was the secret that Mrs. Reed wants to confess to Jane before on her deathbed. Jane returned to Thornfield, where it's expected that Mr. Rochester will soon marry Blanche Ingram. On Midsummer Eve or night, however, when Mr. Rochester tells Jane that she will have to find her another job after his marriage, Jane breaks down or collapses and reveals her love to him. Rochester admits that it's she whom he has loved all along and asks her to marry him. 2 nights before the wedding, Jane awakens to find a strange woman standing over her bed. It's not Grace Poole, but someone far more frightening, with a swollen, blotchy face and wearing a shapeless white shift. This strange woman tears or cuts Jane's bridal veil into and stomps or treads on it. Rochester assures or confirms to Jane that the stranger must have been Grace Poole and that her hideous or ugly appearance was only a nightmare. يعني just imagination in Jane's dreams. It's the day of the wedding. The ceremony or the wedding party has already begun when it's interrupted by the coming of two men, Richard Mason and a lawyer from London. The lawyer is called Mr. Briggs. Briggs announces or declares that Rochester already has a wife called Bertha Mason, who is already living at Thornyfield. She is a strange woman living in the third floor, locked inside her room and producing the eerie or strange laughter. Rochester confesses that his wife hopelessly and violently insane, which means mad woman. She lives in the locked rooms on the third floor of the house. Mr. Briggs, the lawyer, then reveals that he works for Jane's uncle, Mr. John Eyre, who knew the Mason family and was determined to keep his niece from making a bigamous marriage, which means to prevent her from marrying a husband who has another wife. Jane had written to tell him she was getting married. Rochester tells Jane that he never loved Bertha, his wife, and only married her at the urging or the demand of his father, who wanted his son to have a rich wife. Because the symptoms or the features of Bertha's insanity or madness were concealed or hidden from him before the wedding, he feels that the marriage was never morally valid, which means that Rochester is persuaded that his marriage is corrupt, because he didn't know that his wife is mad. According to the laws of England, he cannot obtain divorce. Yani he cannot separate from his mad wife. He asked Jane to run away or elope or escape with him to France and live as his mistress or his beloved. But Jane refuses because of her self-integrity. Jane wants to live as a respectable woman, as a legal wife, not as a mistress. Early the next morning, Jane flees or escapes Thornyfield, traveling as far away as she can on the little money she has. Hungry and destitute or without any money or very little money, she's taken in by two sisters, Diana and Mary Rivers. In addition to the help of their brother, St. John Rivers, Jane gets work as a teacher at a charity school in the parish where he is a clergyman or a man of religion. Fearful of scandal or shame, Jane hasn't told her new friends her correct last name. Some months later, when St. John discovers her true identity or her true name or her true character by accident or by chance, he realizes that she is his missing cousin, Miss Eyre. What's more, that he tells Jane that her uncle John Eyre has died and left her a fortune of £20,000. Jane decides to share the money with St. John, Diana, and Mary, who have been so kind to her and who are the family she has always yearned for or longed for, or wishes to have. St. John is the pale, cold man who brags or boasts to Jane that he is overcoming or controlling the tendencies or the emotions of his earthly nature in order to prepare himself for a life of missionary service or calling for Christianity in India. Among the temptations he overcomes is his love for Rosamond Oliver, a beautiful and wealthy girl who wants to marry him. Because he thinks that Jane, plain and used to hardship as she is, would make a better missionary's wife, St. John proposes to her or asks Jane to marry him. Jane, after much inner struggle or internal conflict, rejects this offer of a cold, loveless marriage and decides that the time has come for her to find out what has become of Rochester, which means that inside her heart she still loves Rochester. But when Jane returns to Thornfield, she discovers that the house has been destroyed in a fire. Mad Bertha, or the Mad Wife, locked in the attic in the third floor, started the conflagration or started the fire of the house and then leaped or jumped to her death from the burning roof of the house. And Rochester, who was trying to rescue her or to save her, lost his left eye, one eye, and the sight of his remaining eye. Jane seeks out Rochester at Ferndean, the isolated hunting lodge or house where he has been living as a hermit or a man of religion. Reunited or met again, they realize that they are still deeply in love and decide to marry. This time it will be a legal marriage because the first wife has been dead. In the concluding chapter of the story, we learn that Jane and Rochester have been married for 10 years and they are idyllically happy. This is the end of the plot summary. Thanks for watching and goodbye.